When filling out a reconditioned pallet worksheet, the first thing we want to obviously look at is it a combo? Is it reconditioned? How do you differentiate between the reconditioned and a combo? 9 times out of 10, a combo pallet will be something that is either odd, not standard in the industry, meaning the stringer might be 60 and the deck board might be 40. In that case, we would use a new stringer and use decking. Combos are good for anything that is under 40 on the deck board, 40 or under, and on the stringer, you can pretty much do anything because you're using new. Reconditioned is obviously been used multiple times. Standard reconditioned sizes go from 4840 being your standard GMA to any square pallets. So that would be anything from like a 3636. Let me start over. A 2424, a 3636, 4242, 4444, up to 48 by 48. Come in reconditioned. Those are standard pallets used in the industry, whether it be the chemical industry, the roofing industry, block plants, etc. There's an abundance of supply out there. That's how we are able to recapture and resell those. So looking at the next box, we're going to determine, is it new stringers and used decking, or is it used stringers and new decking? The only way you would have enough material to do a used stringer and new decking would be, again, if it's 48 inches or under. That's where you could use a used stringer and new decking. New stringers, as I explained before, can be anything with used decking, meaning 40 inches or under. Going down to the description of recycled pallets. Is it a high grade number 1, a grade number 1, or a grade number 2? What are the differences between these three? A high grade number 1 is often referred to as a club grade pallet, a Sam's grade pallet, a AAA, a Primo. All of those things mean high grade number 1. High grade number 1 have 6-inch leads, which measure 5.5. That means your lead boards on the top and bottom are 5.5. A standard grade number 1, often referred to as an A grade as well, may or may not have those 6-inch leads, so we just call it a standard grade number 1 or a standard A. Grade number 2, often referred to as a B grade, means that the stringers have been broke at some point in time and have plugs or additional support, and they can have multiple plugs. They're typically darker in color. They're referred to as a one-way pallet. They will get your product from point A to point B, and that's about it. They're bottom of the barrel, ugly, dark, but they are the most cost-effective pallets out there. Here is where we would add our dimensions. Your stringer dimension would always be your first box, and your board dimension would be your second box. So if it was a 4840, 48 would go in your first box, 40, which is your deck board length, would go in the second box. Single faced means there's no stringer or no bottom boards whatsoever, only top boards. Sometimes it's called a skid as well. That's what single faced means. Double faced means it has top and bottom boards. Two-way means that you can only enter that pallet from the front and the back. And four-way means you can enter that pallet from all 4 sides. Reversible means that the top and bottom pallet, the top of the pallet and the bottom of the pallet are identical. So if you were to flip that pallet over, it would be identical on both sides. Going down to the measuring of the pallet. Again, first you're going to count the stringers. We have, in this example, we have 3 stringers. So I would write 3 here, and then I would measure the width of the stringer. That's from side to side. And then I would measure the height of the pallet, which would go in your second box. And then I would measure the length of the pallet. That would go in your third box. Moving down to top deck, how many top decks does it have? Now again, this worksheet is more for your square pallets, your combo pallets, not necessarily for your number 1, number 2, and high grades. Number 1, number 2, and high grades have 7 top and 5 bottom. 9 times out of 10. That's the standard for those 3 grades. So this is more for your combos and things that are square, that are out of the norm, that aren't your 4840. Okay, moving down to the top deck, we would count how many top decks there are. In this case, there's 6. We'd put 6. How thick are they? Let's call them 1/2 inch. We would say 1/2 inch. By the width would be your 3.5 or 5.5. By your length, which would be your 40 in most cases, if that's what we're measuring. Bottom deck, same thing. You're going to start with how thick is the board. It's going to be your first square that's filled out. How wide is the board will be your second, and then the length of the board will go here. And then you'll list how many are on the bottom as well. Moving over here. Is the pallet flush? Flush means it's flush with the side of the stringer. Is it a single wing? Again, this example up here is a single wing. That means that the pallet board hangs over the stringer, but the bottom is flush, so that's called a single wing. Double wing would be if both boards, top and bottom, hung over the side of the stringer. That would be considered a double wing. And then at that point we would also measure. And what we're measuring is how far from the side of that stringer does that board hang out? Is it 1 inch? Is it 2 inch? Is it 3 inches? And we would mark that number here. If it's a double wing, same thing. How far do those boards hang out? And we would put that those boards hang out. If it's 3 inches, we'd write it's a 3-inch double wing. Moving down to the reconditioned requirements. Some customers, especially in the food grade, do not want plates or plugs. Plates, stringers can be repaired with plates and still look like an A grade because there's just literally on the outside is a piece of metal. So there's no sister stringers or blocks or anything in between. It's just the outside has been repaired with a plate. You'll want to mark, are plates acceptable? Yes or no. Are plugs acceptable? Yes or no. Now we know if it's a B grade, we're going to see multiple plugs. So if we were measuring or looking at a B grade, we would say yes, plugs are acceptable because it's a B grade and they have multiple stringer repairs. 6-inch leads is what differentiates a regular number 1 and a high grade number 1, as we talked about earlier. So if this was a high grade we were measuring, we would say yes, this pallet has 6-inch leads. Is it only on the top? Is it only on the bottom? Or is it top and bottom? This comes into play when a customer has a roller system or a racking system where they need to have 6-inch leads on the bottom, but they don't care about the top. Or maybe they're stacking a certain way and they only need 6-inch leads on the top, not the bottom. A lot of mills can sort for those and still give you a competitive price and not be as high as a standard high grade with 6-inch leads top and bottom. So this is important to notice right away. Are you seeing 6-inch leads on the top and bottom on everything, or is it just always on the bottom, or is it always on the top? And here's where you would note that. Stencil, color code, and stamp. Stencil would be writing that's on the side of the pallet, typically on the outside of the stringer, and it could be the company name, it could be a part number, or it could be return to pavestone, for instance. We would write that here, yes, it's a stencil, and we would write exactly what it needs to say or what that part number is for this particular item that we are measuring. Color code would be, typically you'll see that on the inside of the pallet. It could be the center stringer, it could be all 3 stringers. What color is it and where is it at? Where is it located? So here is where we would mark color code. Let's say it's green and it's only in the center. We would say, yes, there's a color code. I'd write green right above it, and I would say only in the center stringer. It needs to be color coded green. Stamp is typically your heat treat stamp, which is on the outside of opposite sides of the outside stringers. And we would say, yes, there's a heat treat stamp. A lot of times if we write down that number that you see, we can track that number back to who's currently building that pallet or where it's being heat treated at least. So that's good to write down just for your own knowledge so that you can kind of research who your competitor is or who you're competing against. Down here would be if you needed to make a quick sketch of your combo pallet that you're measuring, maybe the center two boards are butted together, or maybe there's some weird thing that you just want to note here. This is where you would write that in. Repair and return program. This is very important for recycled customers. A lot of customers will have you pull out their pallets that are broken and repair them and return them back to them at a reduced rate. This is what this means. Do you have a repair and return program, or are you just selling your scrap outbound, and is it scrap that can be purchased? This is where you would make all of these notes. How do you know that? If it's a 4840, we all know that there's a value because it's the largest used pallet in the industry. So here's where we would mark, yes, there's scrap outbound. We'd say yes, it's 4840s. We know there's a value. We'd make a note of that here. Do they get a credit for the scrap? If it's a 4840, they're getting some sort of credit 9 times out of 10. So we would say yes, they're getting a credit. We're going to need to quote that as well when we give them pricing. Do they need a drop trailer for their scrap? This is typically when they have large volume of scrap coming out and they need somewhere to store it. So we would drop a trailer for the scrap and pull it out. We would just mark yes here. Back to the repair and return. Again, that's a program that we can implement and be competitive and offer if it's currently not being offered, or we could at least quote apples to apples by pulling out their pallets, repairing them, and sending them back at a reduced rate from them purchasing just flat out the pallets from us. If you can get that information, great. What are they getting for their scrap? What is their repair and return cost? It's always nice to try to get a number if you can. If not, we can discuss where we think we need to be to get that business. Over here, is it unloaded from a flatbed or a box trailer? This is typically, flatbeds are when there are no docks or their docks are constantly being used and they need to unload in the yard, or they are unloading in their parking lot. We would mark yes, they need a flatbed. Flatbeds are typically more expensive, so if there's any way to get them in a box trailer, that's our number one goal. But if they have to have a flatbed, we need to know that right out of the chute because it will affect the freight. Stacking and banding. Some companies will want their pallets banded, and maybe it's the back 4 stacks, or maybe it's the whole load. Here is where we will mark that they want them banded. Do they want them banded in full stacks, meaning one band through every 20-22 pallets high, or do they want them banded 10 at a time or 11 at a time? This is where you would mark that. Is it metal or is it plastic, or do they have a preference? Here is where you will mark that. And then moving over here, this is your supplier. When you get back to the office, you would basically, once completing this entire sheet, you would write out the plants that you really think would be a good fit that are within 100 miles of this customer. I want to use ABC Corp. Please send it to DEF Corp. And also these 2 suppliers. I think they're close. I think this is a good fit, et cetera, et cetera. So we write the names of the plants that we want to send it to down here. And this is kind of the same thing over here in regards to the stack height. Talking about this up here. Are their pallets being stacked 20 high, 22 high, 23 high? We want to maximize the truck, so This is very important to try to understand what is the maximum height we could go on these stacks. A lot of this will depend on deck board thickness, but we always want to shoot for maximizing the load so that we're most competitive. And then again, down here, if it's a 48-foot trailer, we know we're going to get a few less stacks than we would in a 53-foot trailer. We would note that here once we know exactly how many we can get on a 48 and how many we can get on a 53.